Hey everybody, it is I, Mr. Aaron. We're getting started a little bit later than usual today. I do apologize for that. I made the silly mistake of not zipping up the front flap on my backpack and the book fell out somewhere. And I didn't notice it until right as I was getting ready to broadcast here, so I had to go search for the book. So I do apologize that we're getting started a little later than usual today, but hopefully that should be okay. Now, we are continuing with the story of Jack Stalwart's secret agent, the escape of the Deadly Dinosaur. You may remember when we left off last time, the dinosaur had escaped from the apartment building, and an Allosaurus was now loose on the streets of New York City, and Jack was trying to figure out a way to turn the Allosaurus from an Allosaurus back into the dog that it was prior to being an Allosaurus. So that is where we are picking up today. Chapter 11. The Goo. The dinosaur's powerful roar blew Jack off his feet and backward onto the street. He landed on his back and hit his head hard on the pavement. A throbbing pain shot through his skull, and he wondered if he had actually cut it open. But thankfully, he hadn't. The dinosaur crept forward and leaned downwards toward Jack. It was trying to tell whether Jack was dead or not. Jack, even in his dazed state, knew that it was only a matter of time before the dinosaur attacked him. He needed to do something, and fast. Jack gathered his wits and counted to 3. He shut his eyes and rolled over twice, swiftly crawling to his knees. Keeping his gaze fixed on the Allosaurus, he reached backwards into his book bag and pulled out a long tube. This was the GPF's goo tube, a perfect solution to Jack's current problem. The goo tube had a glue-like substance hidden inside that, when ejected, expanded on impact. Usually, Jack used the goo tube to plug holes. As the dinosaur's mouth was as good a hole as any, Jack lifted the tube to face the creature and pushed the ejector button. The expandable goo flew into the dinosaur's mouth just as it opened its jaws. Bloop! Pop! The goo blew up in an instant, so the dinosaur couldn't close its chops. There was no way it could bite into Jack now. Jack sprinted back to Thomas. "That was close!" exclaimed Thomas. "Thanks for the warning," said Jack, giving Thomas a friendly slap on the back. Jack thought a bit better of Thomas for trying to help him. Maybe he was all right after all. Jack and Thomas dashed into a nearby laundrette and looked at the dinosaur through the glass front door. The sound of tumbling dryers and washing machines rumbled in the background as Jack watched the dinosaur rapidly eating through the goo. It smacked its lips and then headed further along 34th Street. "What's up ahead?" Jack asked Thomas. "The Empire State Building," said Thomas, looking worried. Jack knew that the Empire State Building was one of the most famous buildings in New York City. Hundreds of people usually waited outside to get into the building and up to the observation deck, and the dinosaur was headed straight for them. How was he going to save so many people at once? Jack thought about his brother Max and the advice Max used to give him. "A successful secret agent," Max used to say, "clears his mind first and then thinks of a plan." Jack did exactly as Max told him. He took a deep breath and considered the risky situation ahead. Almost immediately, an idea popped into his brain. "Got it!" he said to himself, pleased that he'd come up with a way to distract the monster. Now it was time to put his plan into action before the dinosaur ate its first victim. Chapter 12. The Dreamy World of Biscuits. Jack turned to Thomas. "Do you have any dog biscuits on you?" he asked. "Huh?" said Thomas with a confused expression on his face. Yeah, I do," he answered. "Great," said Jack. "Let me have them." Thomas rifled through his trouser pockets and pulled out a half-eaten bag of dog biscuits. He handed it to Jack, who threw it on the ground and began to stamp all over it. Thomas scratched his head, wondering what on earth Jack was up to. Perfect, said Jack as he picked up the bag of dog biscuit dust. Just what I need. Let's get going. Jack shoved open the laundrette door and raced down the street toward the Allosaurus, with Thomas following close behind. Up ahead, as Jack had expected, there was a line of people waiting to enter the Empire State Building. The dinosaur was running their way. It announced its presence. The terrified people turned and started squealing. Jack reached into his book bag. He pulled out the spray gun and grabbed an empty vial that was clipped to its side. Then he poured the dog biscuit dust into the tube and inserted it into the gun. He closed the latch and pointed it into the sky just ahead of the dinosaur. Jack pulled the trigger, and a spray of biscuit dust was ejected into the dinosaur's path. As soon as it smelled the biscuits, the Allosaurus stopped in its tracks. It looked as if there was a bit of Freddy in there after all. Its enormous tail was wagging excitedly, and it dreamily began to run right into the biscuit dust and away from the line of people. Freddy the dinosaur was sniffing in all the biscuit vapors he could. Quickly, Jack and Thomas ran toward the terrified people and hurried them into a nearby department store. From inside the store, they watched the Allosaurus stand up. It shook its head and came out of the trance. The dinosaur looked around to find no one left on the street. Just like a dog, it cocked its leg on a nearby fire hydrant and then moved along 34th Street until it hit Broadway, where it moved north. Jack pulled out his map of New York City. It looked as though the dinosaur was heading towards 42nd Street and Times Square, one of the most populated places in the city. They were at least 10 blocks away from Times Square. There was no way that he and Thomas could keep up with the Allosaurus for 10 blocks. They needed help. They needed the flyboard. Chapter 13. The Flyboard. Jack ran outside. He reached into his book bag and pulled out the GPF's flyboard, which was one of the newer gadgets in the GPF's arsenal. It looked like a skateboard, only it had 2 small hydrogen-powered jets mounted on the back. He unfolded the board so it clicked into place, put it on the ground, and stepped on. "Hold on!" he shouted to Thomas. Jack punched the Wheels button on his watch phone and activated the Wheels feature. Before he knew it, the jet engines fired up, and he and Thomas were speeding toward the dinosaur that was now at least 6 blocks ahead. Jack could see the Allosaurus in front of them. It was within minutes of reaching Times Square. "Get inside!" he screamed to the people up ahead. "Get inside!" But Jack was too far away for anyone to hear him. "I have to warn them!" he shouted to Thomas above the noise of the flyboard's jet engines. He scrambled through his book bag and reached for the warning gun. Quickly, he lifted it up and looked at the side of the barrel. There were 26 buttons on the warning gun, 1 for each letter of the alphabet. He punched in the phrase, "Danger, get indoors," pointed the barrel into the air, and pulled the trigger. The letters shot up one by one like puffs of smoke, so that the message could be seen all over the city. "That should do it," said Jack, smiling at his quick thinking. He hooked the warning gun onto one of the belt loops on his pants, just in case he needed it again. The flyboard meant they were catching up with the dinosaur. They sailed past 39th and 40th Streets, heading toward 42nd and Times Square. The dinosaur announced itself as it entered Times Square. Jack and Thomas zoomed in just behind it. There were giant television screens flickering on the tops of buildings. Cars were pulled to the side of the road with their doors open, and no one left inside. Everyone must have seen Jack's message. Jack was pleased. The dinosaur looked disgusted. In its rage, the dinosaur trampled over several yellow New York taxis. The sound was almost deafening as metal and glass flew all over the road. Jack and Thomas ducked to avoid the spewing debris. When the noise stopped, Jack and Thomas lifted their heads. The dinosaur was running north again, towards the upper parts of the city. "Where do you think it's headed?" Jack asked Thomas. "Well, if it were Freddy," said Thomas, "probably Central Park." "Why Central Park?" asked Jack. "Because," Thomas explained, "Freddy loves to visit the animals at the Central Park Zoo." Jack thought for a minute. It made even more sense that the Allosaurus would be heading for the zoo. The animals were mainly kept in cages, so they would be easy prey. There would be no way they could escape the dinosaur's powerful jaws. And, of course, they couldn't read Jack's message. They would have no idea that a deadly dinosaur was headed their way. "Quick," said Jack, "we have to save the animals." Jack fired up the flyboard once again, and he and Thomas jetted off, leaving only a light trail of water-filled steam behind them. They knew it was a race against time, and they had some catching up to do. Chapter 14. The Hero. Jack and Thomas sped towards the park. Up ahead, Thomas spotted the dinosaur. "It's reached the park!" he screamed. The two of them watched as its swaying tail disappeared underneath the trees. Jack and Thomas ducked as the flyboard carried them under the same trees and onto a road. On the other side of the road was an enormous ice skating rink. The dinosaur was already there and about to cross it. "It's crossing the ice!" yelled Thomas as the dinosaur slammed through a glass barrier and stepped onto the cold, hard rink. Thankfully for Jack, the ice rink had just closed for the year, so there weren't any people around. The Allosaurus lumbered across the ice and made it to the other side. It roared again before picking up its feet and moving north, this time across the grass. Jack and Thomas arrived at the edge of the ice and stopped. There was no way around the rink. They had to cross it too. Jack activated the blades feature on the flyboard. Instantly, the wheels were sucked inside and two long blades popped down. Jack fired up the jets and the flyboard carried them across the ice at top speed, faster than any champion speed skater. As they reached the opposite side of the rink, the flyboard began to bleep. Jack looked down. It was not an encouraging noise. The power bar was telling him that there was almost no hydrogen left. There was no way the flyboard could carry them any further. Jack needed to think of another way. Quickly, he looked around. To his right, parked on the road, was a yellow taxi with a man inside. Jack dashed over to the taxi and banged on the window. The man, who was cowering inside, jumped in his seat and peered out. He looked at Jack and reluctantly rolled down the window. "I need a favor," Jack said breathlessly. "I need you to drive north on this road." "But the dinosaur is out there!" screamed the man. "I don't want to be eaten!" "I know," said Jack. "I'm trying to capture him. If you help me, you'll be a hero." "A hero?" said the man, a grin brimming on his face. He paused for a second and said, "Okay, I will help you." "Great," said Jack. "Come on, get in," he shouted to Thomas as he opened the passenger door of the taxi and dived into the back seat. Thomas jumped in behind Jack. The taxi driver started the car and slammed his foot on the pedal. The car screeched north after the dinosaur and towards the helpless animals that had no idea what was coming their way. Chapter 15. The Dilemma. Jack looked out at the park from inside the moving car. In the distance, he could see the dinosaur running through the trees and over the ancient boulders that littered the grass. If it weren't for the taxi driver, Jack would have lost the dinosaur by now, but they were almost neck and neck with it, and Jack felt sure that he would beat it to the zoo. The road curved slightly to the left. "Look!" said Thomas to Jack as he pointed to a building. "That's the zoo!" "Great!" said Jack. He leaned toward the driver. "Can you pull over there, please?" he asked. The driver veered to the left and brought the car to a dead stop. Jack flung open the door. "Thanks!" he yelled as he and Jack bolted out of the car and ran towards the entrance. Jack and Thomas ran past a sign saying, "The zoo is now closed," and jumped over the turnstiles. They dashed into the meeting area and looked around. The dinosaur was nowhere in sight. As far as Jack could tell, they had managed to beat it to the zoo. Jack panted breathlessly and thought about the situation. Central Park was spread over 843 acres. The Allosaurus could be anywhere. If Thomas was wrong about where Freddy was heading, Jack might fail in his mission. He had to trap the dinosaur and somehow administer the serum. As Jack was thinking about what to do, he heard a sound. It was the dinosaur's roar as it was coming their way. Chapter 16. The Transformation. Jack told Thomas to run for cover while he prepared for the Allosaurus to arrive. He quickly reached into his book bag and grabbed a metal canister. Inside the container was another GPF gadget, the rubber slide. But Jack didn't need the slide today, just the canister itself. He stood there with the canister in his hands and waited for the dinosaur to enter the zoo. The dinosaur ripped through the entrance and smashed the turnstiles. It raged into the meeting area where Jack was standing and paused for a second while it registered his presence. Jack stood there, his knees beginning to tremble. Slowly the dinosaur pawed its way over to Jack and lowered its head. It took a long sniff at Jack and showed him its razor-sharp teeth. A drip of drool slid off one of its teeth and splattered onto Jack's foot. All Jack needed was for the dinosaur to roar again, and his plan could be put into action. With one swift toss, Jack hurled the canister in the direction of the dinosaur's gaping mouth. The metal cylinder wedged itself at the back of the Allosaurus's jaws, making it impossible for the dinosaur to close its mouth. The creature stood up and shook its head violently, trying to loosen the canister. Quickly, Jack pulled the reversal serum out of his trouser pocket and the super sling out of his book bag. He placed the vial into the catapult and pulled it as far back as he could. With trembling hands, he aimed the vial directly at the dinosaur's mouth and fired. Whang! The serum shot through the air and landed right on the dinosaur's tongue. As it shook its head, the glass vial slipped underneath the metal can and down the back of the creature's throat. The serum was now inside its stomach, and it was only a matter of time before it started to work. Jack and Thomas stared at the creature with horror and hope. Suddenly, the dinosaur bolted upright as if it had been frozen solid. Jack watched as it swayed to the right and then to the left, before crashing down to the ground with an incredible thud. It lay there for only a moment before an enormous gust of wind blew in from the east. The violent wind swirled around the Allosaurus and began to turn its bones to dust. Jack, his eyes wide as saucers, watched as the second gust of wind came from the west and carried the dinosaur away in a big whoosh. When Jack looked down again, all that was left was his metal canister, a toe bone, and a cute little dog that was wagging its tail excitedly at the animals across the meeting area. "Freddy!" Thomas shouted with joy as he ran over to his beloved pet. "I'm so glad you're alive! Oh, thanks to Jack, you're back!" Freddy licked Thomas's face. Then, when Jack leaned down to the dog, Freddy licked him, too. In the distance, Jack could hear the sound of police sirens. They were coming to capture the dinosaur. Jack thought about how shocked they would be to find that it had completely vanished. He turned to Thomas, who was stroking Freddy's fur. "You know," he said to Thomas, "there's still something you need to do." "I know," said Thomas, looking a bit sheepish. "I need to return the toe bone. Can we do it together?" he asked Jack. "I'm a bit nervous." "Sure," said Jack as he and Thomas stood up. Jack collected his canister and put the ancient bones safely in his pocket. Then the three of them, Jack, Thomas, and Freddy, made their way west out of the park and towards the museum. Chapter 17. The Apology. The trio climbed the steps of the museum and walked inside. There, atop a ladder, dusting the dinosaur bones, was Louis Porter. "Hi, Louis," said Jack, as he and Thomas walked towards him. Louis turned round. "Hi, excuse me. Hi, Jack. he said excitedly, clambering down the ladder. "Any luck? I heard about the commotion on the news. I was tempted to get out into the streets and see the action for myself, but knowing these dinosaurs as well as I do, I decided to stay indoors." "You were right to do that," said Jack. "It was a pretty hairy situation, but we got it under control, and we, that is, Thomas and I, have something to return." He pulled the missing toe bone out of his pocket, gave it to Thomas, and nudged him forward. "Thomas here," said Jack, "has something to say." Thomas said, looking sheepishly at the ground. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for taking the bone. I shouldn't have done it. I made a mess of everything. I created a monster that could have killed people. I feel awful." Lewis didn't say anything. He let Thomas carry on. "And, well, anyway," added Thomas, "I'd like to repay you by helping out here at the museum. That is, if you'd let me." Lewis took a few seconds to think, and then smiled at Thomas. "Wonderful," he said. "I could use the help. The police might even look more kindly on you if they know you're making amends. Why don't you start by dusting the dinosaurs?" Lewis suggested. "You can begin at the top," he said, pointing to an incredibly tall ladder, "at the head of the Barosaurus." Thomas looked at the Barosaurus and gulped. "You know, I'm a bit scared of heights," he said nervously. Lewis looked at Thomas. A grin spread across his face. "Well, I guess I'd better get going," said Jack. He turned to Thomas and smiled. "Take care of yourself, Thomas. And Freddie, too," he said as he patted Freddie's head. "Sure will," said Thomas. "Thanks again," he said. "Without your help, I don't know what would have happened. I've definitely learned my lesson." He looked a bit sad to see Jack go. Jack smiled and turned to Lewis. "Are there any maps of the world around here?" he asked. "Of course," Lewis answered. "Through the main hall and to the left." Jack said goodbye and walked further into the museum, leaving Thomas to climb up the ladder, his knees clearly shaking with fear. After Jack passed by some other exhibits in the museum, he noticed the map of the world that Lewis was talking about. Not as big as his own, mind you, but it would do. He pulled out a small flag from his book bag and stuck it into the map on top of Britain. Instantly a light began to glow inside the country. Jack waited for the light to shine brightly before he shouted, "Off to England!" It flickered and burst, sucking Jack into the map and transporting him home. Chapter 18. The Last Look. When Jack arrived, he found himself in the middle of his room. The time on the clock was exactly 7:31 p.m. Suddenly he remembered something. "Oh, now where are they?" Jack asked himself as he rummaged through the clothes in the middle drawer of his chest of drawers. When he spied what he was looking for, he pulled them out. After a quick change, he walked over to his full-length mirror and took a good look. There he was, dressed head to toe in the dinosaur pajamas he'd gotten for Christmas. There were all sorts of dinosaur images on his PJs, but the one on his shoulder was definitely a picture of an Allosaurus. "A perfect end to this mission," he said, smiling to himself as he walked over to his bed and crawled under the covers. "Night, Wizzy," he said to his miniature globe. Then he turned out the light and fell asleep. And that brings us to the end of Secret Agent Jack Stalwart, The Escape of the Deadly Dinosaur. Now, for those of you who have listened today, I have an important question for you. I did a video chat with somebody the other day, and I was having microphone issues, and they told me that I actually sounded better when I used the built-in mic on my laptop instead of the plug-in mic that I have been using. So I used the built-in mic on the laptop today. So if you get a chance, let me know in the comments, did my voice sound better today, or did it sound better previously when I was using the plug-in mic? 'Cause whichever one sounds better, I'll make sure to use that one going forward. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to swing by again tomorrow at 2 p.m. when we'll be starting a new story. Of course, don't forget to check out our other live programs, Creating with Constance, Toddler Time with Miss Becky, and Stories with Sunny. And we'll see you soon. Thanks so much, guys.